Welcome to Relative, our family mess. Here, I bring you the raw, unspoken stories of older men betrayed by the very families they spent a lifetime protecting, and the dark secrets hidden within the modern home. Now, here is today's story.
The rain had been falling on Pittsburgh for 3 days straight. The kind of cold gray drizzle that seeps into your bones and stays there. I stood at the front of the gathering, my hand resting on the cold bronze shoulder of my brother's statue, and I waited for the words to come the way they always did on this day. They never came easily. 28 years. And they still didn't come easily. The statue showed Ray the way he was at 38, the year he died. The sculptor had gotten the eyes wrong, but he got the hands right. My brother had welder's hands, thick and scarred, the same as mine. We were twins. When I look at my own hands now, knuckles swollen with age, I still see his. Ray and I built Mercer steel and construction from a single welding torch and a rented garage on the south side. We were 22 years old, broke, and stubborn as mules. I remember the first winter, the two of us sleeping in that garage under a single wool blanket because we couldn't afford to heat an apartment and a workshop. Both. Ray would lie there in the dark and talk about the things we would build someday. Bridges, schools, hospitals, places that would still be standing long after we were gone. He was the conscience of the company, and I was the muscle. He used to say that any fool could pour concrete, but it took a real man to make sure the concrete didn't fall on somebody's child. I never forgot that. I built my whole life on it. A small crowd had come to the memorial, mostly old hands who remembered him, a few executives who didn't. My son Daniel stood near the podium in a charcoal suit that cost more than my first truck, adjusting his cufflinks, waiting for his turn to speak. He had been giving the eulogy for years now. He was good at it. Too good, if I'm honest. Though I never let myself finish that thought. When Daniel stepped up to the microphone, the rain seemed to soften, as if even the sky wanted to hear him perform. He spoke about his Uncle Ray with a catch in his voice, about the tragedy that took a great man before his time, about the family legacy carried forward in blood. People wiped their eyes. A reporter from the local paper scribbled in a notebook. Daniel let a single tear fall at exactly the right moment, then squared his jaw like a man bearing a heavy weight with dignity. I clapped along with the others. I told myself I was proud. I told myself a lot of things back then. The grief never really left me. Every year on the anniversary, I came back to this spot and I carried the same weight I had carried since the morning they pulled my brother's body out from under that collapsed scaffolding. The worst part, the part I never said out loud to anyone, was that I had not been on the site that day. I was across town signing a contract. I have spent 28 years believing that if I had been there, if I had walked that platform myself the way I always did, Ray would still be alive. A man can drown in a guilt like that. I nearly did. There were nights, in the first years, when I sat in the dark workshop with a bottle and a loaded silence, and only the thought of my family kept me in my chair. The crowd began to thin as the rain picked up again. Daniel shook hands, posed for a photograph, and climbed into a black car without saying goodbye to me. I stayed behind, like I always did, alone with the bronze man who shared my face. That was when I heard the wet, rattling cough behind me. I turned and saw an old man shuffling across the muddy grass. It took me a moment to place him. Sal Romano. He had been one of our best welders back in the early days, a quiet man with steady hands. He must have been 70 now, and the years had not been kind. His cheeks had caved in. His skin had gone the color of old paper. He gripped a cane in one hand, and the other hand pressed a handkerchief to his mouth. When he pulled it away, I saw the dark stain on the cloth, and I understood that Sal Romano was a dying man. "Walter," he said, and his voice was a dry whisper. "I have to talk to you. I should have come years ago. God forgive me. I should have come 28 years ago." I told him to take it easy, to sit down out of the rain. I reached for his elbow to steady him. He grabbed my wrist instead, with a strength that surprised me, and he pulled me close enough that I could smell the sickness on his breath. His eyes were wide and wet and full of something I had not seen in a long time. Fear. Real. Bone-deep fear. "You have to listen to me," he said. "I can't take it to the grave. I won't. Not anymore. I have been a coward my whole life, Walter. But I will not die one." "Sal, what are you talking about?" He looked over my shoulder, toward the road where Daniel's black car had disappeared into the rain. Then he looked back at me, and the words he spoke next reached into my chest and stopped my heart cold. "Ray didn't fall," he whispered. "He was pushed. And the man who signed off on it still eats dinner at your table." The rain kept falling. The bronze statue kept staring at nothing. And for the first time in 28 years, the ground beneath my feet was no longer solid. I did not answer him. I could not. The words had knocked the breath clean out of me, the way a steel beam had once caught me across the ribs when I was young and careless on a job site. I just stood there in the rain, my mouth open, while a dying man held my wrist and told me my brother had been murdered. "Come with me," Sal rasped. "Out of the rain. I don't have the strength to say this twice." I helped him to a stone bench under the bare branches of an old oak at the edge of the cemetery. He lowered himself down, slow and careful, the way the very sick and the very old do, as if his bones were made of glass. I sat beside him. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Sal, if this is some kind of cruel joke," I started, but he held up a trembling hand and stopped me. "I wish to God it were," he said. "I have carried this for 28 years. Walter, it is the reason I drink. It is the reason my wife left me. It is the reason I am sitting here in a graveyard dying of cancer, with nothing to show for my life, but a guilt that won't let me sleep." He reached into the inside pocket of his worn coat, and his hand was shaking so badly that he dropped what he was holding. It landed in his lap. When I saw it, the whole world tilted sideways. It was a pocket watch, old brass, scratched and dented, with a hairline crack across the glass face. I would have known it anywhere. I had bought 2 of them, identical, from a pawn shop on Carson Street when Ray and I signed our first real contract. One for him and one for me. Mine was still in the top drawer of my dresser at home. The other had gone into the ground with my brother, or so I had believed for nearly 3 decades. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. My voice did not sound like my own. "He gave it to me." Sal said, "The night before he died, he came to my house after dark, and he was scared. Walter, I had never seen your brother scared in my life. He gave me this watch, and he told me that if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe. He said the truth was inside it. I was a coward. I kept it in a coffee can in my basement for 28 years because I was afraid of what would happen to me if anyone knew I had it. I picked up the watch. The metal was cold and wet from the rain. My hands, the same hands my brother and I had shared the shape of, would not stop trembling. Afraid of who? I asked. Sal coughed then, a long, wet, tearing sound that bent him double. He pressed the handkerchief to his mouth, and when he finally straightened up, there was fresh blood on the cloth, bright against the gray day. He looked at me with watering eyes. "Of the man who is building empires on your brother's grave," he said. "Walter, Listen to me. Ray found something. Something wrong with the steel on one of the jobs. A school. He was going to take it to the city. He told me he could not look the other way, while children walked under a roof that might come down on them. He said it would cost the company millions, but that some things were worth more than money. 2 days later, he was dead. And they called it an accident. A school. The word landed somewhere deep inside me, and I did not yet understand why it frightened me so much. I would understand soon enough. What school? Sal, what was the name of it? He shook his head. I don't remember the name. It was so long ago, and I tried so hard to forget all of it. But it's in there. He nodded at the watch in my hand. He told me the truth was inside it. I never had the courage to look. I'm telling you. Walter. In 28 years, I never once opened it. I turned the watch over in my fingers. There was a small seam along the back of the case, the kind you press with a thumbnail to spring open. My nail found the groove. For a moment, I hesitated. Some part of me knew that whatever I found inside would burn down the life I had spent 46 years building. The family, the company, the grief I had learned to live with. All of it. But Ray had been my brother. My other half. And I had spent 28 years blaming myself for a death that, if this old man was telling the truth, I had been lied to about from the very first morning. I pressed the seam. The back of the case sprang open with a faint metallic click. Inside, folded into a square no bigger than a postage stamp, was a slip of paper gone soft and yellow with age. And tucked behind it, pressed flat against the brass, was something that made my breath catch hard in my chest. A small photograph, faded almost to nothing, of a steel beam stamped with a serial number, and scrawled across the bottom margin, in my brother's own unmistakable hand, were 4 words. My hands began to shake so violently I nearly dropped it. The 4 words written in my brother's hand were these: "They know. Tell Walter." I sat alone in the cab of my old pickup truck in the cemetery parking lot for a long time after Sal shuffled away into the rain. I held the watch in one hand and the tiny photograph in the other. And I read those 3 small words over and over until the letters stopped meaning anything at all. Tell Walter. He had been trying to reach me. The night before he died, scared half to death. My brother had hidden his last message inside the one object he knew I would recognize, and then he had handed it to a frightened man who buried it in a coffee can for 28 years. I did not drive home. I could not face Margaret yet. Could not sit across the dinner table and pretend the world had not just cracked down the middle. Instead, I drove to the old plant on 2nd Avenue, the original Mercer building, the one Daniel kept threatening to sell. My key still worked the side door. The boy had never bothered to change the locks on a building he considered a relic. The lights buzzed on, pale and flickering. The place smelled of cold metal and dust and 1,000 memories. My old office was still there at the end of the hall, untouched. A museum nobody visited. And in the steel cabinets along the back wall were the company archives, the paper records from the years before everything went digital. The years when Ray was still alive. I knew exactly which file I wanted. I had read it 100 times in the months after his death, searching for some way to forgive myself. The accident report, case number, date, time, the scaffolding collapse that killed Raymond Mercer. My hands shook as I pulled the folder. I had read it as a grieving brother before, looking for blame to lay on my own shoulders. Now I read it as something else, as a man who had just been told it was all a lie, and this time I saw the cracks. The report stated that the scaffolding had failed due to a defective coupling joint that had given way under load. A tragic equipment failure, it said. No one at fault. But I had spent 46 years in this business. I knew scaffolding the way a surgeon knows the human body. And there, stapled to the back of the report, was the maintenance log for that exact platform. The platform had been inspected and certified safe 3 days before my brother died. I read the inspector's signature. I read the date. I read the green stamp that said all couplings had been load tested and approved. 3 days. A certified coupling does not simply give way 3 days after a full inspection. Not unless someone wanted it to. I sat down hard in my old chair, the springs groaning under me, and I felt something cold and terrible settle into my stomach. For 28 years, I had believed my brother died because of a flaw in a piece of steel. I had blamed the equipment. I had blamed the company. Most of all, I had blamed myself for not being there. But equipment that passes inspection on a Monday does not collapse on a Thursday by accident. Somebody had loosened that coupling. Somebody had walked onto that platform between the inspection and the morning ray climbed up. And somebody had made sure my brother would fall. It was not an accident. Sal had been telling the truth. I kept reading. Hunting now. My exhaustion burned away by a slow and rising fury. There was a supplemental note clipped to the inspection log, a single sheet ordering a re-inspection of the same platform. The order had been filed the day after Ray died. The re-inspection had concluded that the coupling failure was natural and unforeseeable. Case closed, but it was the name at the bottom of that re-inspection order that made the room go quiet around me. The person who had requested the second inspection, the one that conveniently buried the question forever, had been a young site engineer, 24 years old at the time, new to the company, hungry, ambitious. I did not need to read the name to know it, but I read it anyway, because some part of me needed to see it printed in black ink to believe it could be real. And when I saw it, the cold thing in my stomach turned to ice. I put the folder down. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark river and the rain, and I tried to make myself breathe. A father learns to make excuses for his children the way he learns to walk, without thinking. A reflex built into the bone. I started building those excuses right there at the window. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe a young engineer signs 100 such orders. Maybe, but a man does not survive 46 years in construction by lying to himself about what he sees. And what I saw, stapled together in that thin yellow folder, was the beginning of a trail. A re-inspection ordered to close a question nobody should have been asking. A coupling that failed 3 days after passing. A brother who had hidden a warning in a watch. I needed someone I could trust completely. There was exactly one person in this city who fit that description, and she was not family. I picked up the watch, the photograph, and the folder, and I locked the old plant behind me. Then I drove through the rain toward the only person left in the world I knew was not lying to me. I needed Nell Cross to tell me whether I was a grieving old fool chasing ghosts, or whether my son had murdered my brother. I did not go straight to Nell. On the way, something pulled me toward the new headquarters, the glass tower downtown that Daniel had built 3 years ago against my objections. I told myself I needed to look at my son with my own eyes, now that I had read that re-inspection order. I told myself I needed to be sure. The truth is, I wanted to be proven wrong. I wanted to walk into that building and see the boy I raised and feel the doubt drain out of me. That is what a father wants. To be wrong about the worst thing he has ever imagined. The lobby was all white marble and cold light, the kind of place that makes a working man wipe his boots twice before he steps inside. The young woman at the desk recognized me and waved me through with a nervous smile. Everyone there still called me Mr. Mercer. To them, I was the founder, the old lion in the photographs on the wall. To my son, I was something else. The executive floor was quiet, carpeted thick enough to swallow my footsteps. As I came around the corner toward Daniel's office, I heard his voice through the half-open door, and I stopped. "I don't care how many years he gave this company," Daniel was saying. "He's a liability. A man his age, hauling a forklift, falls and breaks a hip. And we're looking at a lawsuit that eats the whole quarter. Cut him loose. Severance, 2 weeks. Done." A second voice, one of his managers, said something I could not hear. "The safety budget is a money pit," Daniel went on. "Every dollar we sink into redundant inspections is a dollar that doesn't reach the bottom line. The regulations are written for cowards. We meet the minimum, we move on. This is a business, not a charity for tired old men." I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to my son explain, in that smooth and patient voice, that the lives of the men who built this company were a line item to be trimmed. Redundant inspections. My brother had died because someone tampered with an inspection. And here was Daniel, calling them a money pit. I pushed the door open. Daniel looked up, and his face shifted in an instant from cold calculation to warm welcome. The way a stage actor changes masks. He was 52 now. Silver at the temples. Handsome in the hard, polished way of men who have never carried anything heavier than a phone. He had his mother's eyes and none of her softness. "Dad," he said, rising, spreading his hands. "What a surprise. You should have called. I'd have cleared my afternoon." The manager slipped out past me. Daniel came around the desk and clasped my shoulder, and I made myself stand still under his hand. "I was in the neighborhood," I said. "Thought I'd see the old man's empire from the top floor." "It's your empire, Dad. Always will be." He smiled. "Though, between us, maybe it's time you let yourself enjoy it. You've been forgetting things lately. The board mentioned it. Missing meetings, repeating yourself. Nobody's judging. You've earned the rest. We worry about you, that's all." There it was. So gentle I almost missed it. The first small stone laid in a wall meant to bury me. "You've been forgetting things." I had not missed a single meeting, but I only nodded, slow and tired, and let him think the stone had landed. "Maybe you're right," I said. "I'm an old fool some days." "Nobody said fool." He squeezed my shoulder again. "Just tired. Go home. Rest." On the way out, my eyes drifted across his desk, and they caught on a framed photograph. Daniel at the memorial podium, head bowed, hand pressed to his heart over his Uncle Ray's name. He had it on display. The performance, framed in silver, sitting where clients could see it. My stomach turned. I drove to Nell Cross with the folder on the seat beside me. Her office was a modest second-floor walk-up above a hardware store. Nothing like Daniel's glass tower. And somehow, it felt more honest because of it. Nell had been a federal prosecutor for 15 years before she went private. I had given her a loan to start her practice when no bank would, and she had never forgotten it. She was 55, sharp as a chisel, and she did not waste words. She read the accident report twice without speaking. She studied the maintenance log, the certification stamp, the reinspection order. She held the tiny photograph from the watch up to her desk lamp and looked at the serial number on the steel beam for a long time. Finally, she set everything down and looked at me with those level gray eyes. "Walter," she said, "I have to ask you something, and I need you to hear it as your lawyer and your friend, not as an old man who misses his brother. Are you sure you want me to pull this thread? Because once I start, I can't promise you'll like where it leads." I already know where it leads, I said. I just need you to prove I'm wrong. She didn't answer that. Instead, she pulled the re-inspection order back toward her, tapped the signature line, and asked the one question I had been running from since I left the old plant. Who had the access and the motive to make a murder look like a mechanical failure back then? Somebody on the inside. Somebody young enough to need the climb and ruthless enough to take it. She looked up. Walter. Whose name is on this order? I did not answer Nell's question out loud. I think we both already knew the name. And saying it in that small office would have made it too real. Too soon. Instead, I told her to keep digging. Quietly. And to tell no one. Then I drove home through the dark to a house that had stopped feeling like mine, somewhere on the road between the cemetery and that glass tower. Margaret and I had lived in the same house on Maple Ridge for 39 years. I built the back porch with my own hands. I planted the maple in the front yard the spring our first child was born. Every board and every nail in that place carried a memory. And for the first time in my life, I stood on my own front steps and felt like a stranger about to walk into a lie. She was in the kitchen when I came in, the radio playing low. The smell of pot roast filling the house the way it had for 4 decades. Margaret was 66 now, her hair gone silver, her hands still quick and sure. When she heard the door, she called out the same thing she always called out. Walter, supper's almost on. I stood in the hallway and looked at her through the doorway. And I tried to see her the way I had seen her that morning. Before any of this, the woman I had loved my whole adult life, the mother of my children. But Sal's words kept echoing in my skull. The man who signed off on it still eats dinner at your table. And a colder question underneath it, one I had not let myself form until now. If my son had done this thing, had he done it alone? Had no one in this house ever suspected? Had no one ever known? Long day, I said, and hung up my coat. We sat down to supper the way we had 10,000 times before. Margaret talked about the neighbors, about the church bake sale, about a leak in the gutter that needed seeing to. I made the right sounds in the right places. And the whole time I watched her, the way a man watches a road for black ice. Then I set down my fork and I said, as gently as I could, I was thinking about Ray today. At the memorial, I was remembering that summer we drove out to the lake, the 4 of us, before the boys were born. You remember Ray fell off the dock, fully dressed, trying to land that base. It was a happy memory, a safe one. I had told it 100 times over the years, and Margaret had always laughed. She did not laugh now. Her hand stopped halfway to her water glass, just for a second. But I saw it. The color drained out of her face the way it drains out of a man who has just heard a beam crack overhead. She set the glass down without drinking and looked at her plate. That was a long time ago, she said quietly. I don't like to dwell on Ray. Walter, you know that. It only brings the sadness back. For 39 years I had read that woman like my own handwriting. And what I saw in her face in that moment was not sadness. Sadness I knew. Sadness we had shared across this very table for 28 years. This was something else. This was fear. The same fear I had seen in a dying man's eyes that very afternoon. I do not know what I would have said next, because the front door opened without a knock, the way it only ever did for one person. Smells like Mom's pot roast, Daniel called, breezing into the kitchen, still in his suit. He kissed his mother on the cheek and clapped me on the shoulder and helped himself to a chair and a plate, as if the years had not changed a thing between us. As if I had not stood in his hallway that afternoon and heard him call good men liabilities. He was charming over supper. He always was. He asked Margaret about her garden and told a funny story about a board member and refilled my coffee before I asked. He watched me too. I caught it twice. That quick, assessing glance. The same one he must have given that old welder before he cut him loose. He was measuring me, looking for the cracks he wanted to find. "Dad seems tired," he said to his mother at one point, as if I were not sitting right there. "I worry about him rattling around this big house. We should talk soon." "Mom," about what's best for him going forward. Margaret did not meet my eyes. She just nodded. Slow, and said something about how I worked too hard. And I understood, sitting there in my own kitchen, that the two people I had given my entire life to were already speaking about me, as if I were a problem to be managed. I excused myself early. I told them I was worn out. And for once, it was the truth. But I didn't go to bed. I went down to the basement, to the old steel cabinets, where I kept the company records that predated the new building. The boxes I had hauled out of the original plant years ago and never sorted. Somewhere in those boxes were the project files from the last jobs Ray ever worked, the last steel he ever inspected, the school he had died trying to warn the city about. I pulled the chain on the bare bulb and got down on my knees in front of the first box. My back ached, and my hands were not what they used to be. But I started to dig. Whatever Ray had found, whatever had cost him his life, I was going to find it too, even if it was buried under 28 years and the silence of everyone I loved. The basement was cold, and the bare bulb threw long shadows across boxes I had not opened in years. I worked through them one at a time, on my knees on the concrete, my reading glasses sliding down my nose. Old payroll ledgers, bid documents, blueprints rolled tight and gone brittle at the edges. The paper smelled of mildew and time. Each box was a year of our lives, and somewhere in them was the year my brother died. It took me past midnight to find it. A water-stained banker's box marked in Ray's own blocky handwriting. The letters as familiar to me as my own face. Active projects. The last box he ever labeled. I lifted the lid with hands that had gone unsteady, and not from age. Inside were the files for the jobs Ray had been working in his final months. A parking structure downtown, a hospital wing, a water treatment plant, and near the bottom, thicker than the rest, a folder with a tab that made my breath stop in my throat. Lincoln Elementary School. I pulled it out and set it on the concrete floor under the light. My brother had been the lead inspector on a new elementary school, a building full of children, the same kind of building he used to dream about that first cold winter in the garage, when he would lie awake and talk about putting up places that would still be standing long after we were gone. I opened the folder. The first pages were ordinary. Site plans. The architect's structural drawings, calling for high-grade load-bearing steel in the support columns and the roof trusses. The bones that hold a building up. I knew how to read these. I had read 10,000 of them. The specifications were sound. The engineering was good. Whoever designed Lincoln Elementary had designed it to last 100 years and keep every child inside it safe. Then I came to the purchase orders, and the floor seemed to drop out from under me. The steel that had actually been ordered for the job was not the steel the drawings called for. The grade was lower, thinner gauge, a cheaper alloy, the kind you might use for a storage shed, not the kind you put in the columns of a building where 600 children would sit 5 days a week. The difference in cost would have been enormous. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Kept instead of spent. And the difference in strength would have been the difference between a building that stands and a building that comes down. Someone had substituted the steel. Someone had ordered the cheap material, pocketed the savings, and let a school go up around it. My hands were shaking so hard the papers rattled. I forced myself to keep turning pages, hunting for the thing I dreaded and needed in equal measure. The authorization, the signature, the name of the man who had approved the substitution. I found it on the material requisition form, on the line that said, "Approved by." The handwriting was younger, but I would have known it anywhere. I had taught the boy to sign his own name at this very kitchen table upstairs, his small hand wrapped in mine. The two of us laughing over the loops of the letters. D. Mercer. Daniel. 24 years old. A site engineer with something to prove and a hunger that I, God help me, had mistaken for ambition. He had ordered the cheap steel. He had stood to make the company a fortune and make himself a name doing it. And Ray was the inspector. Ray would have caught it. Ray would have walked those columns with his own 2 hands and his own 2 eyes, and he would have known in a heartbeat that the steel was wrong. He would have known that children would be sitting under it. And my brother was not a man who could look away from a thing like that. Not for money, not for family, not for anything in this world. He was going to take it to the city. Sal had told me. He could not look the other way while children walked under a roof that might come down on them. 2 days later, Ray was dead. A coupling that passed inspection failed under his weight. A re-inspection ordered by a 24-year-old engineer closed the question forever. I sat back against the cold cinder block wall, and I felt the last piece slide into place. And it was the most terrible piece of all. My son had not killed his uncle in a moment of rage or panic. He had killed him to protect a fraud. He had murdered the best man I ever knew. The brother who shared my face and my hands and half my soul, so that a balance sheet would look better and a young man's career would climb faster. And then, for 28 years, he had stood at that man's memorial every single year and wept for the cameras. I pressed my fist against my mouth so that Margaret would not hear me upstairs. The grief and the rage came up together, and I did not know which was going to win, but under both of them, cold and clear. A single question rose up that I could not push back down. Lincoln Elementary had been finished. It had opened. Children had walked through its doors. The building was still standing, which meant the cheap steel was still standing too. 28 years of it, holding up a roof over hundreds of children who climbed under it every single morning. Never knowing. My God, I whispered to the empty basement. What did my brother die trying to stop? And is it still happening right now? I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until the gray light came up over the maple in the yard, the Lincoln file in front of me and a cold cup of coffee going colder. Somewhere upstairs, Margaret slept, or pretended to. I no longer knew which. A younger man might have driven straight to that glass tower at dawn, kicked in his son's door, and thrown the file across the desk. There was a time I would have done exactly that. I am a man built for confrontation. My whole life I have met trouble head-on, the way you meet a falling beam, by getting under it and holding it up with your own back. But I had spent the long hours of that night thinking it through, the way Ray would have wanted me to. Ray was the careful one. Ray would have told me that a man who tips his hand loses the game before the first card is played. If I confronted Daniel now, what did I have? A re-inspection order with his name on it. A purchase form he could call a clerical error from 3 decades ago. An old man's word and a dying man's whisper. Daniel had lawyers on retainer who ate cases like mine for breakfast. He would smile that smooth smile, express his concern for my failing memory. And within a month, I would be the one explaining myself to a doctor in a quiet room while he signed the papers to take everything. He had already laid the groundwork for that. You've been forgetting things lately. He had been building my cage in plain sight, and I had been too trusting to see the bars, so I made a decision there at the kitchen table as the sun came up. If my son wanted to believe I was a confused old man losing his grip, then by God, I would give him a confused old man. I would be the very thing he needed me to be. I would play the fool so well that he would never think to look for the lion underneath. It went against everything in my nature. Pride is the last thing a working man gives up. But I thought of Ray's bronze face, staring at nothing in the rain. And I thought of 600 children walking under bad steel every morning. And I found I could swallow my pride whole. I called Nell before her office opened. I told her what I had found in the basement. There was a long silence on the line. "Walter," she said finally, "if that steel is what you say it is, this stopped being only about your brother. We're talking about a public building, a school. If it's still standing on substandard material, that's not just a cold case. That's a clock." "I know," I said. "Ray knew it too. That's why he's dead." We met that afternoon, not at her office, but in the back booth of a workingman's diner near the rail yards, the kind of place Daniel would never set foot in. Over bad coffee and a plate of eggs neither of us touched. We built our plan. Nell would work 2 tracks at once. The first was the money. She would quietly pull the financial records. The offshore, the savings from that cheap steel had flowed into. Every job since where the same pattern might repeat. A man does not steal once and stop. If Daniel had built his career on cutting corners and burying the evidence, there would be a trail 28 years long, and money always leaves footprints. The second track was the steel itself. Nell knew a structural engineer, a retired man with no ties to the company and no reason to lie, who could assess Lincoln Elementary without raising an alarm. We had to know how bad it was. We had to know how much time those children had. "And you," Nell said, pointing her fork at me, "what's your job in all this?" "My job," I said, "is to be exactly the man my son thinks I am. Forgetful, tired, harmless. I'm going to let him think his plan is working. I'm going to let him get comfortable. Comfortable men get careless. And when he's careless enough, he'll tell me something he shouldn't." Nell studied me across the table for a long moment. "That's a hard part to play. Walter, letting your own boy treat you like you're already gone. Smiling while he does it. He let me grieve my brother for 28 years, I said. He stood at that grave and cried for the cameras every single year, while I blamed myself for not being there to save Ray. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I buried that guilt in my chest for half my life. I can carry a little play acting for a few more weeks. I drove home and I began. When Margaret asked where I had been, I let myself fumble the answer, named the wrong day, repeated a question she had already answered. I saw the flicker of worry cross her face, and underneath it, God forgive her, something that looked almost like relief, as if a forgetful Walter was an easier Walter to live with than a Walter who asked about Ray. That night, Daniel called the house to check on me, the way a dutiful son checks on a failing father. I let my voice wander. I called him by his cousin's name, and then corrected myself with an old man's flustered laugh. I heard the satisfaction settle into his tone, smooth and certain. Get some rest, Dad, he said warmly. We'll take care of everything. You don't have to worry about a thing anymore. I know you will, son, I said. I know you will. I hung up the phone, and in the dark of my own hallway, I let the trembling old man fall away from my shoulders like a coat. The hands that gripped the receiver were steady. My mind had not been this clear in years. Let him take care of everything. Let him get comfortable. I had built this entire empire from a welding torch and a wool blanket, and I had crushed harder men than my son across 46 years of business. He had forgotten who I was. I was about to remind him. The hardest part of playing a fool is the patience it demands. A lion wants to charge. I made myself wait. For the better part of a week, I wore the mask. I shuffled through the old plant in front of the few workers Daniel had not yet let go. I let appointments slip. I asked Margaret the same questions twice on purpose, and watched her grow more certain every day that her husband was fading. It cost me something each time. But every day, I played the failing old man. Nell pulled another thread loose in the dark, and every day Daniel grew a little more comfortable, a little more certain the board was already his. Then I made my move. I called Daniel and asked him to come by the old plant on 2nd Avenue. I told him I wanted his help going through the early company records before we sold the building. I let my voice quaver. I said I kept getting confused about which boxes were which, and that I needed my smart boy to sort it out for me. He came that Saturday, dressed down for once, sleeves rolled, playing the patient son. We worked through the boxes together in the dusty light, and I steered us, careful as a man crossing thin ice, toward the year his uncle died. You know, I said, holding up an old crew photo. I still think about that morning. The scaffolding. I was never even on site. Across town signing the Callaway contract. I let my eyes go wet and far away, which was not hard, because the grief was real even when the foolishness was not. I've gone over it 1,000 times. Daniel, I never understood how a platform we'd just inspected could come down like that. Daniel was quiet for a moment, turning a rolled blueprint in his hands. It came down because the east coupling sheared, he said. Not the joint they certified, the one underneath it, on the cross brace. It looked fine on a walkthrough. You'd never have caught it from the deck. I kept my face slack and tired, but inside me something went very still. The accident report did not say which coupling failed. I had read that report 100 times. It said only that a coupling joint had given way under load. It named no specific brace, no east side, no cross member underneath. The detail Daniel had just offered. So smoothly, so certainly, was the kind of thing a man knows only if he was standing on that platform with a wrench in his hand. Only if he knew exactly which coupling to loosen and which one to leave so the inspectors would chase the wrong one. He had been 24 years old, and he was not even supposed to have been on that site the night before. East coupling, I murmured. Vague, as if the words meant nothing to me. Is that what they decided my memory's not what it was? That's what the engineers determined, Daniel said, and he set the blueprint down a little too carefully. For just a moment his eyes flicked to me, sharp and assessing, checking whether the old fool had noticed anything. I gave him nothing but a watery, grateful smile. I'm glad you understand these things, I said. I just get muddled. The sharpness went out of his face. He patted my arm. Don't worry about any of it. Dad, that's what I'm here for. We worked a while longer. And then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, stepped out into the hallway, and pulled the door most of the way shut behind him. He thought I was a deaf old man among his boxes. But 46 years on job sites teaches a man to hear a whisper under a jackhammer, and I have never lost the ear. I told you. Handle it, Daniel said low, his voice flat and businesslike, nothing like the warm son's voice he used with me. The paperwork on my father is moving. Dr. Riley's signing the cognitive assessment by the end of the month. Once that's filed, the power of attorney is a formality. He won't even understand what he's signing. A pause. My own heart was a fist against my ribs. No, Daniel went on. Lincoln does not get re-inspected. Not now. Not ever. I don't care who's asking. If the city sends anybody, you call me first and we slow walk it. That building has stood for 28 years, and it can stand 28 more. The last thing we need is somebody pulling a core sample out of those columns. Do you understand me? Nobody touches Lincoln. The line went quiet. I heard him take a breath, smooth himself back into the dutiful sun. The door opened. He came back in smiling. Sorry, Dad. Work never stops. He clapped his hands together. What do you say we call it for today? You look tired. Let me drive you home. I let him take my arm. I let him walk me out to his car like an invalid. I let him fuss over my seatbelt. And the whole time, two facts sat side by side in my chest, cold and clear and terrible. My son was weeks away from having me declared incompetent and stripped of everything I had ever built. Dr. Riley. End of the month. A name and a deadline I had not had before, and he was going to fight, with everything he had, to keep anyone from ever testing the steel in that school, which meant he knew. He knew exactly what was holding up that roof, and he knew exactly what would happen if a core sample ever came out of those columns. The two things were no longer separate fears. They were one plan, and I was at the center of it. He needed me silenced and the school untouched, and he had a timeline for both. So now, by God, so did I. Nell called me 3 days later and told me to come to her office after dark. She did not say why over the phone. She had grown careful, the way people grow careful when they start to understand the size of the thing they are touching. I went after the streets had emptied. She had pulled the blinds and spread the work across every flat surface in the small room. Bank records and spreadsheets and old corporate filings laid out like the pieces of an engine she had taken apart to find the broken part. She looked like she had not slept. There was a hardness in her face I recognized from my own mirror. Sit down, Walter, she said. I followed the money, and it's worse than your brother's death. I mean, it's worse because your brother's death wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning. I sat. She handed me the first page. Lincoln Elementary, she said. The school was bid and built the year before Ray died. The contract specified premium load-bearing steel. The company billed the school district for premium steel. The district paid for premium steel. She tapped the page. But the purchase orders, the ones you found in your basement, show the company actually bought a cheaper grade. The difference between what they charged and what they spent on that one job was just under $400,000. $400,000, I said. The number sat in the room like a body. That money didn't go back to the company's books. Nell went on. It was routed through a shell vendor, a supplier that existed on paper and nowhere else. And the man who set up that vendor account, the man who approved its invoices, was a 24-year-old site engineer named Daniel Mercer. I had known it was coming. I had known since the basement. But hearing her say it, flat and certain, in that quiet room, was like having the beam come down on me all over again. Here's the part that matters now, Nell said, and she laid down a second stack, thicker than the first. I didn't stop at Lincoln. A man doesn't steal $400,000 once and then live honest for 30 years. So I looked at the jobs that came after. The bridge retrofit on the north side, 2 parking structures, a wing at St. Agnes Hospital, a senior living complex out in the valley. She spread them out one by one, and with each one my stomach sank further. Same pattern, she said. Premium materials billed, cheaper materials bought. The difference skimmed through shell vendors and buried. Different names on the shells, but the same fingerprints, the same approval signatures climbing the chain as he climbed it. He started as a hungry engineer cutting one corner. He became a CFO, then a CEO, running the whole machine. Walter, your son didn't just kill your brother to hide one fraud. He killed him to protect a business model. And he's been running it for 28 years. I looked at the spread of paper, at the bridge, and the hospital, and the homes for the old. All of them built on the same lie that had killed Ray. All of them standing right now over people who did not know. How many of them are dangerous, I asked. How many are like Lincoln? I don't know yet, Nell said quietly. That's what the engineer is for. But Walter, even one is a catastrophe waiting to happen. And Lincoln is a school. We sat with that for a while. The radiator ticked. Outside. A train moved somewhere in the dark. Then Nell pushed one more sheet across the desk, slower than the others, and I saw from her face that this one was different. This one she had not wanted to find. There's something else, she said. The Lincoln money, the $400,000, it didn't all stay with Daniel. A portion of it, about $60,000, moved out of the shell vendor a few months after Ray died. It went into a personal account, not Daniel's. She paused. It was a household account. Walter. A joint account. It was used to pay off the second mortgage on a house. On Maple Ridge. The room went very quiet. Maple Ridge. My house. The house I had built the back porch on with my own 2 hands. There has to be an explanation, I heard myself say. It was the father's reflex again, the same one I had felt in the hallway of the glass tower, reaching to build excuses out of nothing. Margaret handled the household money in those years. She wouldn't have known where it came from. She couldn't have. Nell did not answer right away. She just looked at me with those level gray eyes. The eyes of a woman who had spent 15 years watching people protect the ones they loved from the truth. Maybe she didn't know, Nell said carefully. But somebody paid off your mortgage with the money from the steel that killed your brother. And it went through your wife's account. I'm not saying what that means. I'm just saying it's there. She folded her hands. You told me you wanted me to prove you were wrong. I can't. I'm sorry. Walter, I can only show you what's true. I drove home through the dark with that sheet of paper folded in my coat pocket, sitting over my heart like a stone. The porch light was on. Margaret had left it on for me, the way she had every night for 39 years. I sat in the truck in my own driveway and looked at that warm yellow light in the window. And for the first time, I let myself ask the question I had been refusing to form since the cemetery. What did my wife know? And how long had she known it? I did not go into the house that night. I could not sit across a breakfast table from Margaret with that question burning in me. Not yet. I slept a few hours in the truck and drove back to Nell's office at first light, because there was one piece still missing, and it was the worst one. The money told me why Ray died. It did not yet tell me how my son had done it, or how she knew he had. Nell was already there. She had a fresh pot of coffee and the recorder from her old prosecutor days sitting on the desk, and beside it a single yellow legal pad covered in her tight handwriting. I tracked down 2 of the crew from that morning, she said. Both retired now, both scared to talk after all these years. But there was a third name on the manifest that kept catching my eye, because he was logged as on site the night before the collapse, working alone. Over time, nobody authorized. Sal Romano. Sal, I said. I went to see him yesterday. At the hospice. Nell's voice softened in a way I had not heard from her before. Walter, he doesn't have long. Days. Maybe. But he wanted to talk. He's been waiting 28 years to talk. And this time, he let me record it. She reached over and pressed play. Sal's voice came out of the little speaker, thin and wet and broken, but clear enough. I gripped the arms of the chair and made myself listen to a dying man describe the night my brother was murdered. Ray had come to the site after dark. Sal said, to walk the Lincoln steel one more time before he filed his report with the city. He had already told the office he would not certify the building. He had already told them the columns were wrong and that he was taking it downtown in the morning. And that evening, young Daniel had come to the site too. Sal had been working late in the fabrication bay and had seen them on the scaffolding together under the work lights. The uncle and the nephew, arguing. He could not hear the words. He saw Ray point at the building, saw Daniel spread his hands the way he still spread them, the gesture of a man explaining why a thing that was wrong was really fine. He saw Ray shake his head and turn to climb down, and he saw Daniel, alone on the platform after Ray had gone, kneel at the east cross brace with a wrench in his hand. Sal had not understood it then. A young engineer checking a coupling at night. What of it? He had gone home. The next morning, the scaffolding came down with Ray on it, and the coupling they blamed was not the one Daniel had touched. And Sal Romano had understood all at once what he had seen, and he had been too afraid to say a single word for the rest of his life. "He threatened me," Sal's voice said on the recording. Not with his fists, with papers, with lawyers. He told me a welder with a record and a drinking problem makes a poor witness against a Mercer. He told me no one would believe me, and I would lose everything. And God help me. Walter, I believed him. I let your brother die a liar's death. I let you blame yourself. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Nell stopped the recording. The room was silent except for the radiator and my own breathing, which had gone ragged. I sat there and I let it land. All of it. The full and final weight of it. My son had stood on a platform with my brother. The man who taught him to fish. The man whose name he would weep over for the cameras every year for the rest of his life. He had argued with him about money. And when Ray would not bend, when Ray chose the children over the family, Daniel had knelt down with a wrench and loosened the steel that would kill him. He was 24 years old. He had my hands and his mother's eyes. And he had murdered his uncle and gone home and slept. I do not know how long I sat there. Nell did not rush me. She had seen men receive terrible news before, and she knew there was nothing to say. "It'll hold up," she said finally, gently. His own words on tape, the money, the steel, the re-inspection in his hand. "Walter, this is enough. When the time comes, this is more than enough." I nodded. I could not speak yet. My phone rang in my coat pocket. I almost didn't answer it. But I saw the name on the screen, and something cold moved through me, and I picked it up. It was Margaret. "Walter." Her voice was wrong, high and tight. The voice of a woman who has been crying or is about to. "Walter, where are you? You didn't come home. I've been calling." "I'm fine," I said. I had business early. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear her breathing. And then she said, the thing that broke whatever small hope I had still been holding, without admitting it to myself. "Walter, please." Her voice dropped to a whisper, the way Sal's had in the rain. "Please stop digging into Ray. I am begging you. Leave it where it lies. Please. I can't. You don't understand what it will do to this family. To me. Please. Walter. For me. Just let it stay buried." And then, before I could say a word, the line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked at Nell. And I think she saw the whole truth arrive in my face. My wife had not asked me what I had found. She had not asked who hurt Ray, or why. She had only begged me to stop. You do not beg a man to stop digging up a grave unless you already know what's buried in it. I drove home in the middle of the day, which I never do. The house was quiet. Margaret's car was in the drive. I found her in the living room, sitting very straight on the edge of the sofa, with her hands folded in her lap. The way a woman sits when she has been waiting a long time for a knock on the door. She had been crying. The afternoon light came soft through the curtains I had hung myself the year Daniel was born. She did not get up when I came in. She just looked at me, and there was no surprise in her face. Only a kind of exhaustion that I realized, with a slow horror, she must have been carrying for 28 years. I did not shout. I had thought, on the drive, that I might, that all the rage in me would come pouring out the moment I saw her. But standing there in our living room, looking at the woman I had loved for 2/3 of my life, I found I didn't have it in me to shout. What I felt was something heavier than anger. It was grief for a marriage I was learning had never quite been what I thought. I took the folded paper from my coat and crossed the room and set it on the coffee table in front of her. The bank record, the $60,000 that had paid off our mortgage, the money from the steal that killed Ray. I know where this came from, I said. My voice was quiet and even, and somehow that was worse than shouting. I know what Daniel did to that school. I know what he did to Ray. And I know this money went through your account, Margaret. So I am going to ask you one time, and I am going to know if you lie to me. Did you know? She looked down at the paper. She did not touch it. For a long moment she said nothing, and I watched the last of the careful, composed wife I had lived with for 39 years crumble away, layer by layer, until what was left was just a frightened old woman in the afternoon light. Not at first, she whispered. I swear to you, Walter, not at first. But you knew. Ray came to see me. The words came out of her in a rush now, as if a wall had finally given way. The night before he died, he didn't come to the office. He came here, to the house, while you were away on the Callaway job. He was so upset. Walter! I had never seen Ray like that. He was pacing the kitchen. He kept saying he'd found something terrible on the school. I sat down slowly in the chair across from her. My legs would not hold me. What did he say? He said the steal was wrong. He said Daniel had ordered the cheap material and pocketed the difference, and that the columns wouldn't hold. Not over time. Not under load. Margaret pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. He said, Walter. He said, I cannot let those children walk under that roof. I have to stop it before someone gets hurt. He was going to the city in the morning. He was going to turn his own nephew in. And he came to me first, because he loved this family. And he wanted me to know it would cost us. He wanted to warn me what was coming. She was weeping now, openly, the tears running down the lines of a face I had kissed 10,000 times. He hugged me at the door before he left, she said. He told me everything would be all right in the end, that doing the right thing was always worth the price. Her voice broke completely, and the next morning he was dead, and I knew. Walter, the moment they told me it was the scaffolding, I knew. A man comes to your kitchen at night terrified of what your son has done, and 12 hours later, he's dead under that son's steel. I knew. The room seemed to tilt around me. I had spent 28 years believing I was the last person to speak to no one, that Ray died alone with his secret, and all that time, my own wife had been carrying his final words. I cannot let those children walk under that roof. The children? Something cold and enormous began to move in my chest. But Margaret was still talking, still pouring out the poison she had held for half a lifetime. And I made myself listen. I wanted to go to the police, she said. I swear to you I did. I sat in this very room with the phone in my hand, but Daniel was only 24. He was my son. Walter. My baby. I had already lost Ray. I could not lose my child, too. Could not send my own boy to prison for the rest of his life. I told myself it was an accident. I told myself I couldn't be sure. I told myself 1,000 things. She looked at me, pleading. And then the mortgage was paid. And I didn't ask how, because I was afraid of the answer. I have been afraid of the answer for 28 years. You let me blame myself, I said. The words came out raw. Every anniversary, every sleepless night. You watched me carry that guilt for not being on the site. And you knew the whole time it wasn't the site. It was our son. She could not answer. She only bowed her head and wept. I should have felt nothing but rage. Part of me did. But I looked at her bowed silver head and I understood, in a way that gave me no comfort at all, that she had been trapped in a smaller, darker version of the same cage I was only now climbing out of. She had chosen one child over justice for another man. It was the worst choice a mother could make, and she had been paying for it every single day. But none of that mattered against the thing now rising in me, the thing her own words had set loose. I stood up. My hands were steady again. "Margaret," I said slowly. "Ray said he couldn't let those children walk under that roof. He said it the night before he died." I felt the blood leave my face. "That was 28 years ago. The school is still standing. Children are walking under that roof right now. This morning. Today." She lifted her head and stared at me, and I watched my own horror bloom in her eyes. "My God," she whispered. "I never thought all this time. I only thought about Ray, about Daniel, about us. I never once thought about the building, but I was already reaching for my coat. Margaret saw me reach for my coat, and she came up off the sofa and crossed the room faster than I had seen her move in years. She caught my arm with both hands. "Walter, wait, please, where are you going?" "To the school," I said. "Where else would I be going? And do what, march in and tear the columns open with your bare hands?" Her voice cracked. "You're an old man. Walter, you can't fix 28 years in an afternoon. Please, sit down. Let me finish. I have never said any of this out loud to a living soul, and if I stop now, I will never have the courage again." There was something in her face that made me stay. Not the fear I had been seeing all week. Something underneath it, finally surfacing. The truth she had been drowning in for half her life. I sat back down. She did not return to the sofa. She stood in the middle of the room, wringing her hands, and she told me the rest of it. It wasn't one decision. "Walter, that's what people don't understand. I didn't decide once to protect him and then it was done. I decided it every single day for 28 years. She drew a shaking breath. "Every anniversary. When you stood at Ray's grave and blamed yourself, I had a choice. I could have told you. And every single year, I chose not to. Because telling you meant losing Daniel. And I had already lost so much. So I chose silence. Again and again and again. Until the silence wasn't a thing I did anymore. It was a thing I was. You traded Ray," I said. "You traded my brother's name, his honor, the truth about how he died, so you could keep our son out of a cell." "Yes." She did not look away when she said it, and I will give her that. "Yes, I traded Ray's justice to keep Daniel. I told myself a mother doesn't get to choose between her children, but I did choose. I chose the living one, and I have hated myself for it every day. And I kept doing it anyway, because by then, there was nothing left to do but keep doing it. Once you've buried a thing that deep, digging it up kills you too." I looked at her for a long time. My wife, the mother of my children, a woman who had committed no murder, who had loved her family so fiercely and so blindly, that she had let her love rot into something monstrous without ever quite seeing it happen. I had spent the drive home hating her. Sitting there, I found I could not. What I felt was so much sadder than hate. He used it against you, I said slowly, understanding it as I spoke. Daniel, once you stayed quiet, he owned you, didn't he? She nodded, and fresh tears spilled over. He never had to threaten me out loud. He just knew. He knew I would never speak, because speaking would damn us both. My silence became his shield. The more I protected him, the more I was tied to it. The mortgage, the years. By the end, I wasn't even protecting my son anymore. I was protecting myself from what I'd already done. That's why you begged me to stop, I said, on the phone, not to protect Daniel, to keep from drowning. I am so tired. Walter. Her voice fell to almost nothing. I'm so tired of being afraid. Some part of me has wanted you to find out for years. I just never had the strength to be the one who told you. We sat in the soft afternoon light, two old people in a house full of memories that had all just been poisoned, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. 39 years. The back porch I built, the maple in the yard, all of it standing on a foundation I had only now learned was rotten, the same as the columns of that school, and that thought brought me back to my feet. Margaret, I said, and my voice was gentle now, gentler than I had any right to be. I'm not going to pretend I understand what you carried, or that I forgive it. I don't know yet what I feel. That's the truth. But there is one thing that cannot wait for me to sort out my own heart. She looked up at me. Ray died trying to stop those children from being hurt. He failed, because Daniel killed him. And for 28 years, every one of us, you, me, Daniel, Sal, every single one of us chose our own fear over those kids. That school is full of children right now. Margaret, today. They are sitting under bad steel that my brother gave his life to warn the world about. And not one of us did the thing he died doing. I picked up my coat from the chair. I spent 28 years grieving a man I couldn't save. I said, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life knowing I could have saved 600 children and didn't, because I was too busy nursing my own broken heart. Ray would never forgive me for that. I would never forgive myself. Margaret stood very still. And then, for the first time since I had walked in, something other than fear came into her face. It might have been shame turning, at long last, into something useful. What do you need me to do? She said quietly. I stopped at the door and looked back at her. My wife, the woman who had failed Ray, asking how to help me finally do right by him. Tell the truth, I said. When the time comes, and it's coming soon, you tell the whole truth. No matter what it costs you. No matter what it costs me. That's the only way any of us climbs out of this. She nodded once, slow and certain, like a woman setting down a weight she had carried so long she had forgotten what it was to stand up straight. I walked out into the afternoon and got in my truck. My hands were steady on the wheel. I had a son to destroy and a brother to vindicate. But first, before any of it, I had a school full of children to save. And the clock that Daniel had kept frozen for 28 years had just started ticking again, loud as a heartbeat. In my ears, I had not set foot near Lincoln Elementary in 28 years. I had avoided that whole part of town the way you avoid pressing on a bruise. Now I drove straight to it, and I parked across the street, and I made myself look. It was a low brick building with a flagpole out front and a hand-painted banner over the doors that read, "Welcome back. Students." It was the middle of the afternoon, and through the chain-link fence I could see the playground full of children. 100 of them, maybe more, running and shrieking and chasing a ball across the blacktop. Little ones, no bigger than my own boys had been when I taught them to sign their names. A teacher stood near the door with a whistle around her neck, laughing at something. I sat in my truck, and I watched those children play under that roof. And I thought about my brother, standing in our kitchen the night before he died, saying, I cannot let those children walk under that roof. He had been talking about these children, not the ones who were grown now, not the first class that ever walked through those doors. He had been talking about every child who would ever come after, for as long as the building stood. He had been talking about the ones out there on the blacktop right now, who had not even been born when he gave his life trying to save them. My eyes burned. I had spent 28 years thinking of Ray's death as the end of a story. Sitting there, I understood it had been the middle of one, and I was the only person left who could finish it the way he would have wanted. I called Nell from the truck. I'm sitting outside Lincoln. I told her. There are 100 kids on the playground. Nell, I'm looking at them. We can't wait for the slow road on this. If those columns are as bad as the orders say, every day is a roll of the dice. I hear you, she said. I've already got the engineer. His name is Tom Okafor, retired structural, used to consult for the state on building failures. There's nobody better and nobody more independent. He doesn't know the Mercer name from a hole in the ground, which is exactly what we want. But Walter, listen to me. We cannot just walk in there and start drilling. That's a public building. We touch it without authorization, and Daniel's lawyers tie us up for a year. We need this done clean, or it doesn't hold. Then how do we get him in? We don't go in the front door, Nell said. Okafor can do a preliminary assessment from the outside and from the public records. The original architectural drawings are on file with the city. The as-built reports are on file with the district. If we put what your brother documented next to what's officially on the books, and Okafor sees the same red flags, that gives us probable cause. That's the lever that forces an official emergency inspection. And once the city's own engineers pull a core sample, it's out of Daniel's hands forever. The original drawings, the honest ones, the ones Ray had inspected against, calling for the premium steel that was never installed. I had a copy of those in the Lincoln file from my basement, and I had something the city didn't have, something Ray had left behind in a brass watch. The photograph of the actual beam, with its serial number, the cheap steel itself, captured by my brother before he died. I have Ray's drawings, I said, and I have his photograph of the real beam, the serial number's right there on it. If your man can match that number to the cheap grade in the purchase orders, we don't just have a suspicion, we have proof in my brother's own hand that the steel in that building is not the steel the children are supposed to be sitting under. There was a silence on the line, and when Nell spoke again, there was something almost reverent in her voice. Your brother built his own case. Walter, she said. 28 years ago. He knew they might silence him. So he documented everything, and he hid it where only you would find it. A pause. He was counting on you. All this time, he was counting on you to finish it. I had to set the phone down for a moment and press the heel of my hand against my eyes. When I could speak again, I told her to get Okafor everything. The drawings, the photograph, the purchase orders, the whole file. She would have it by nightfall. A bell rang inside the school. The children began to stream off the playground toward the doors, a happy chaos of backpacks and untied shoes, herded gently by the teacher with the whistle. I watched the last of them disappear inside, watched those heavy steel-framed doors swing shut behind them. And I thought about the columns hidden inside the walls, the bones of the building, 28 years older and never once tested. I am a builder. I have spent my life reading structures the way other men read faces. And sitting there, looking at that ordinary brick school, I felt the thing I had learned to feel on a job site when something was wrong long before the instruments confirmed it. A wrongness in the bones of the place. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was just the knowledge of what was in those purchase orders. But I felt it all the same, a cold certainty settling into my gut. That building was living on borrowed time. It had been for 28 years. And every morning those doors opened and filled it with children was another morning. The dice came up safe by luck and nothing else. I started the truck. I had a file to deliver and an engineer to put to work, and a son who was racing his own clock to lock me away before I could stop him. Whoever's clock ran out first would decide whether those children kept walking safely through those doors, or whether I would spend whatever years I had left knowing I had seen the danger with my own eyes and had not been fast enough. I did not intend to be too late. Not this time. Not for these children. Not for Ray. Tom Okafor was a tall, soft-spoken man in his late 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the patient hands of someone who had spent his life examining things that other men had gotten fatally wrong. We met in Nell's office 2 days later. He had spread my brother's drawings across the table beside the city's filed plans, and the photograph from the watch sat under a magnifier off to one side. He did not waste time on sympathy. He talked the way I talk, the way working men talk when lives are involved. Plain and direct. I'll tell you what I see, Mr. Mercer, and I'll tell you what I can't say yet without a core sample. He began. What I see is bad. The structural drawings, the original engineering, called for a high-grade load-bearing steel in the columns and the primary roof trusses. 60,000 pounds per square inch minimum yield. That's the right call for a building that size, with that occupancy. Children, assembly spaces, a gymnasium. You design it to take a beating and never blink. He slid the purchase orders forward. What was actually bought and installed, according to these, is a low-carbon structural steel, a utility grade, maybe 36,000 pounds per square inch. It's fine for a warehouse rack or an equipment shed. It is not fine for the spine of a school. He tapped the photograph. And this beam, the one your brother photographed, the serial number matches a mill batch of that cheaper grade. So this isn't a theory. The steel in the picture your brother left you is the wrong steel. And it's in that building. I had known it. I had read the orders myself. But hearing a man like Okafor say it out loud, flat and certain, made it real in a way the paper never had. How bad? I asked. In plain words. What does it mean? Okafor took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, and when he looked at me, his eyes were grave. In plain words, that building has been operating for 28 years, with maybe 60% of the load capacity it was designed for. It hasn't failed yet. And people will tell you that proves it's fine. It doesn't. It proves it's been lucky. Steel that's overstressed doesn't announce itself. It fatigues. Microscopic cracks. Year after year. In the joints and the welds. And they grow. And one day, they reach a tipping point. He paused. A heavy snow load on the roof. A minor earthquake. And this region does get them. A gas explosion. A vehicle impact. Even just enough time and enough cycles of heat and cold. Any of it could be the day the margin runs out. And when an overstressed steel structure goes, Mr. Mercer, it doesn't crack and give you warning. It comes down all at once. The room was very quiet. It should have been condemned the day it was built. Okafor said, "It can't keep standing on luck. Not over a gymnasium full of children. We are not talking about whether this is a problem. We're talking about how much time is left. And that is a question I cannot answer. And that is exactly why nobody should be inside that building. I sat with that. 600 children. Every morning. For 28 years and counting. And the only thing that had kept them alive was a roll of the dice that came up safe. Day after day. Until the day it wouldn't. Then we move now, I said. Today. What do you need from me to force the city's hand? It's already in motion, Nell said. Tom's preliminary assessment, your brother's documentation, the purchase orders. I've drafted the petition for an emergency structural inspection, filed under public safety. It can compel the district to act within days, not months. Once the city's own engineers pull a core sample, the truth is on the public record, and no lawyer on earth can bury it again. Days, I said. Days, if nothing stops it. That night, something tried to stop it. I came home to find a man in a cheap suit waiting on my front porch. He handed me a thick envelope, said my name to confirm it, and walked back to his car without another word. I knew a process server when I saw one. I had been on the other end of enough lawsuits in my life. I opened it standing under the porch light, the same light Margaret had left on for me for 39 years. It was a petition. My son had filed it that morning. It requested an emergency guardianship hearing on the grounds that Walter Mercer, age 68, was suffering from progressive cognitive decline that rendered him a danger to himself and to the financial interests of the Mercer family and the company. It cited a physician's preliminary assessment, signed by a Dr. Riley. It cited witnesses to my recent confusion, my forgotten meetings, my muddled phone calls. It cited Margaret. I stood there reading my wife's name on the list of those who had observed my decline, and for one cold moment I thought she had betrayed me after all, until I understood. The confusion she had witnessed was the confusion I had performed for her on purpose. Daniel had built his case out of the very mask I had been wearing to protect myself from him. My play acting had become his ammunition. The hearing was set for 8 days out. 8 days for a judge to decide whether I was competent to manage my own affairs, or whether everything I owned, everything I knew, and every word I might say about my brother, and that school would be handed to my son and locked away behind a diagnosis. 8 days, and the city needed days too to force its inspection. 2 clocks, started by 2 men, running side by side toward the same finish line. If Daniel's hearing came first, and that gavel fell against me, I would become a man whose every claim could be dismissed as the rambling of a failing mind. The petition for the school, the evidence about Ray, the recording of a dying welder, all of it filed by an incompetent old man, all of it suspect, all of it slowed and tangled long enough for those columns to come down on their own. I folded the envelope and put it in my coat. My hands, I noticed, were perfectly steady. He thought 8 days was enough to bury me. He had no idea how fast a man can move when he has finally stopped grieving and started fighting. The call came 2 mornings later, while I was at the kitchen table with Nell going over the petition for the school. It was the hospice. A nurse with a kind, tired voice told me that Salvatore Romano had passed in the night, peacefully, in his sleep. She said he had left instructions that I be notified. She said he had not had many visitors. I set the phone down and looked out the window at the maple in the yard. And I grieved, in a small, quiet way, for a man I had barely known, and yet who had given me back the truth at the cost of his own peace. Sal Romano had spent 28 years drowning in a secret that was not even his to carry. And at the very end, dying, with nothing left to lose and nothing left to gain. He had found the courage that had eluded him his whole life. He had told the truth. He had handed me the watch. He had let Nell record his confession. He had done, in his last days, The one brave thing his fear had cost him for nearly 3 decades. I thought I understood the full measure of what Sal had given me. I was wrong. There was one more gift coming. It arrived that afternoon by ordinary mail, a padded envelope addressed in a shaky, old-fashioned hand I did not recognize. The postmark was 3 days old. He had mailed it before he died. Knowing he would not be alive when it reached me, I opened it at the kitchen table with Nell watching. Inside was a thick bundle of papers, yellowed and brittle, wrapped in a sheet of plastic and bound with a rubber band that had gone hard with age. And on top, folded around them, a letter in that same trembling hand. I read the letter first, Walter. It began, "By the time you read this, I will be gone, and I will not have to be afraid anymore. I have been afraid every day for 28 years, and I am tired of it. I am giving you what I kept." The night Ray gave me his watch. He gave me something else, too. He did not trust the company files, because he knew they could be changed. So he made copies of everything, and he asked me to hide them. The real inspection report, the one where he failed the building and wrote down every reason why. The original lab certification for the steel that was ordered, showing the cheap grade, his own notes, in his own hand, dated and signed, laying out what Daniel had done and what he was going to do about it. I hid them in the wall of my basement behind the furnace, and I never looked at them again. I told myself I was keeping them safe. The truth is, I was keeping them hidden. For him, as much as from him. I was a coward. Walter. For 28 years, I let your brother be remembered as a man who died in an accident, when the truth was right there behind my furnace the whole time. I cannot give Ray his life back. I cannot give you back the years you spent blaming yourself. But I can give you this. Everything he documented. Everything they tried to bury with him. Use it. Make it count. Make them pay for what they did to him and what they did to that school. I was a coward for 28 years. Let an old man die brave. Salvatore Romano. I had to put the letter down. My eyes had gone too blurred to read. And there was a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart, and everything to do with it. Nell had gone very still across the table. She reached over slowly and drew the bundle of papers toward her, and she unwound the brittle rubber band with the care of a woman handling something sacred. She read the top page, then the next. Her face, which I had watched stay flat and professional through bank records, and a recorded confession, and the worst news a man can hear about his own son, finally changed. "Walter," she said quietly, "do you understand what this is? It's Ray's report. It's more than that." She looked up at me, and there was something close to awe in her eyes. "This is your brother's complete case, in his own handwriting, dated 28 years ago. The failed inspection, the lab certs proving the steel substitution, his written statement naming Daniel and describing the fraud. This isn't a copy of evidence that could be challenged. This is the original documentation, created by the licensed inspector of record before he was killed for it." She set it down as if it might break. A dead man just testified. Walter, from 28 years ago, in his own hand. There is no lawyer alive who can call this the rambling of a confused old man. Your brother proved his own murder and the danger to that school before either one happened. I sat there in my kitchen, in the afternoon light, with my brother's voice reaching across 28 years through the courage of a dying welder. And I understood at last what I had been given. Daniel had built his whole defense on the idea that the only witnesses against him were a forgetful old man and ghosts. He had a hearing in 6 days to declare me incompetent and make everything I said worthless. And now I was holding Ray's own hand, The honest dead, speaking plainly, beyond any power of my sons to silence or dismiss. I looked at Nell. "How fast can we move?" I said. "Faster than him," she said. "Now we can—" I folded Sal's letter and put it in my breast pocket, over my heart, next to the bank record and the photograph and all the weight I had been carrying since the cemetery. But this weight felt different. This one felt like an answer. A frightened man had spent his whole life as a coward, and then chosen, in his final hour, to die brave. He had handed me the one thing I needed to finish what my brother started. The least I could do was be brave, too. We worked through that night and into the gray of the next morning. Nell and I, at my kitchen table, with Ray's papers and Sal's letter and 28 years of buried truth spread out between us. By the time the sun came up over the maple, we had built the whole picture, and it was even worse and even cleaner than I had let myself believe. It all came down to one thing. In the end, my brother had not died for money, though money was what killed him. He had died for those children. Every thread led back to that, and I made myself hold the whole of it in my mind at once, because I owed it to him to understand exactly what he had given his life for. Daniel, at 24, had stolen $400,000 by putting cheap steel into a school. Ray, doing his job, doing the thing he had promised himself he would always do back in that cold garage, had caught it. He had failed the building. He had documented everything. He had decided to turn in his own nephew, knowing it would cost the family a fortune and a name, because the alternative was letting children sit under a roof that might come down on them. He had come to Margaret to warn her. He had hidden his evidence with Sal, and then he had gone to the site one last time. And Daniel had knelt at a coupling with a wrench and made sure the only honest man in the company never reached the city in the morning. That was the heart of it. Not greed. Not even murder, exactly. Though it was that, too. It was a man who chose 600 strangers' children over his own comfort, his own family, his own life. And it was a son who chose the opposite, and had spent 28 years and several more buildings choosing it again and again. He wasn't just protecting himself when he killed Ray. I said, he was protecting the whole machine. Ray was a threat to the entire way Daniel was going to make his fortune. Cut the corner. Bury the difference. Silence anyone who looks too close. Ray was the first person who looked too close. He made himself an example, and the school is still standing, Nell said quietly. Which means Ray was right about everything. The danger he died trying to stop is still there. The exact danger. 28 years later, the same columns, the same children's lives. Nothing about it has been resolved. It's been frozen. The way Daniel freezes everything. The murder, the fraud, the danger. All of it just suspended in place, held down by money and fear. Waiting for someone to finally do what Ray died trying to do, I said. We sat with that, the enormity of it. My brother's death had not been the end of a tragedy. It had been the beginning of a danger that was still live, still ticking, still aimed at children who had not been born when he died. Then Nell straightened up, and the lawyer came back into her voice, and we turned from grief to war. Here's where we are, she said. We have 3 separate things, and each one is a kill shot on its own. We have the murder, proven by Sal's recorded testimony and Ray's own documentation. We have the fraud, proven by the financial trail across multiple buildings. And we have the present danger, proven by Okafor and Ray's lab certs, which forces an emergency public inspection. Daniel built his defense to handle one confused old man. He cannot handle all 3 at once, delivered clean, with the honest dead doing half the talking. He has the guardianship hearing in 6 days, I said. If that gavel falls first, everything I bring after looks like a vendetta from a man they've declared incompetent. Then we don't bring it after, Nell said. We bring it before, and we don't bring it quietly, where his lawyers can wrap it in motions and delays for a year. She looked at me. We bring it where he can't bury it, in front of witnesses who matter, in front of the people who can act on it on the spot. I understood her then, and a cold clarity settled over me. I picked up the phone that morning and I made arrangements. Daniel had been pushing for weeks to hold a formal event, a celebration of the leadership transition, a public anointing of himself as the man carrying the Mercer name into the future. He wanted the board there. He wanted the press there. He wanted the whole city to watch the torch pass from the failing old founder to the brilliant young heir. I called him, and I let my voice quaver, and I told him I thought he was right, that it was time, that I wanted to do it properly, with the board and the reporters and all of it, and announce my retirement and hand him the company with my blessing. I told him I was tired, and that I wanted to make peace before the hearing, to do this with dignity instead of in a courtroom. I heard the triumph in his voice, smooth and warm and certain. He thought he had won. He set the date for 4 days out, 2 days before the hearing that would seal me away. He was building me a stage to bury me on. And he was going to fill it with every person in this city whose witness could matter. The board, the press, and, though he did not know it yet, the city building inspector and the district attorney, who would be in that room as my guests. With Ray's papers and Sal's recording and Okafor's report already in their hands, I hung up the phone and looked at Nell. 4 days, I said. He thinks he's holding his coronation. What is he really holding? She asked, though I could see she already knew. I looked down at my brother's handwriting, at the courage of a man 28 years in the grave, and at the letter from a coward who had finally died brave. His reckoning, I said. He just doesn't know it yet. The event was held in the grand atrium of the glass tower, the building Daniel had put up against my wishes, all marble and cold light, the very heart of the empire he believed was now his. They had set out rows of white chairs and a podium with the Mercer logo, and a long table of catered food no working man would recognize. The board sat in the front rows in their good suits. Reporters from 2 papers and a local station clustered along the side with their cameras and their notebooks. It was exactly the stage Daniel had wanted. He had built it himself, to crown himself. And he had no idea I had quietly invited 2 more guests. The city building inspector sat in the 3rd row in a plain gray jacket, looking like nobody at all. Beside her sat a woman from the district attorney's office. Both of them had spent the last 3 days with Ray's papers, Sal's recording, and Tom Okafor's report. Both of them were waiting. I came in on Margaret's arm, shuffling, slow, an old man being helped to his own retirement. I had played this part for weeks, and I played it now better than I ever had. I let my hand tremble. I let my eyes go vague and watery. Daniel met us at the front, beaming, and kissed his mother's cheek and gripped my shoulder for the cameras. "There he is," he said warmly, loud enough to carry. "The man who built all of this. Come on, Dad. Big day." He walked me to a seat in the front row as if I might break. Margaret sat beside me. I felt her hand find mine, and it was steady. Whatever else she had been, in that moment, she was with me. We had not spoken much in the days since the living room, but she had made her choice. She had come to tell the truth. Daniel took the podium. He was magnificent. I will give him that. He spoke about legacy and sacrifice and blood. He spoke about the founder, his father, gesturing to me with a soft, sad smile that said, without saying it, that the old lion was tired now, and it was time. He talked about carrying the Mercer name forward. He even spoke about his Uncle Ray, the great man lost too soon, whose memory lived on in everything the company did. He let his voice catch at exactly the right moment. The same catch he had performed at that grave every year for 28 years. And I watched a reporter write it down. And so today, Daniel said, with my father's blessing, I'm honored to step forward and lead this company into its next chapter. He turned to me and extended his hand, inviting the old man up for the handoff, the photograph, the torch passing. The cameras leaned in. I stood up, but I did not take his hand, and I did not shuffle. I straightened my back, the full height of me, the way I had not let anyone in that building see me stand in weeks, and I felt the change ripple through the room before anyone understood it. Margaret's hand slipped from mine as I stepped forward, not as a frail old man, but as the man who had built this company from a welding torch and 46 years of work. The vague, watery look was gone from my eyes. I let them all see it go. Thank you, Daniel, I said, and my voice carried to the back of the atrium without a tremble in it. Before I hand over anything, I'd like to say a few words about legacy myself, about Ray. Since my son brought him up, Daniel's smile held, but I saw the first flicker behind his eyes. He did not yet know what was wrong. He only knew that something was. I reached into my coat pocket and took out the brass pocket watch, and I held it up so the light caught it. This belonged to my brother, I said. I bought two, the day Ray and I signed our first contract. He carried his every day of his life. It went into the ground with him. I always thought, until 2 weeks ago, a dying man put it in my hand at Ray's memorial and told me my brother didn't fall from that scaffolding. He was pushed. The room went very still. A reporter stopped writing. There's a message inside it, I said, in Ray's own hand. It says, they know. Tell Walter. My brother hid his last words inside this watch because he knew he was in danger. He knew someone in this company was going to silence him. I turned the watch slowly in the light. He was right. Daniel stepped toward me, his voice dropping low and urgent. The warmth gone. Dad, this isn't the time. You're confused. We talked about this. Your memory has been... My memory is fine. Son. I said the word. Son plainly. And it landed in the silence like a stone in a well. It's better than it's been in years. You see, I've been letting you believe I was failing. I've been letting you build your little case with Dr. Riley, because it kept you comfortable while I found out the truth. And I found all of it. I turned to the board, to the cameras, to the inspector, and the woman from the district attorney's office sitting quiet in the third row. 28 years ago, I said, this company put cheap steel into an elementary school and billed the city for the good kind. My brother caught it. He was the inspector. He documented every bit of it, and he was going to take it to the city to protect the children sitting under that roof. My voice did not shake. I would not let it. And the man who ordered that steel, the man who pocketed $400,000, killed him to keep him quiet. Then he stood at my brother's grave every year and wept for the cameras. I looked at my son. Tell them, Daniel, tell them whose signature is on the steel order. The atrium was so silent I could hear the cameras. Daniel's face had gone the color of ash, and for the first time in his life, the smooth and certain man I had raised had nothing whatsoever to say. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. The whole atrium hung on that silence, the board frozen in their chairs, the camera still rolling. Then I watched my son do the thing he had done his entire life. I watched him reach for control. "This is elder abuse," he said, turning to the room, spreading his hands in that old familiar gesture, the one Sal had seen him make on the scaffolding 28 years ago. His voice was smooth again, reasonable, warm with concern. "My father is a sick man. We have a physician's assessment. We have a guardianship hearing in 2 days, precisely because of episodes like this. I am so sorry you all had to see this. It's exactly the decline we've been worried about. Dad, please, let me get you home." He took a step toward me, reaching for my arm, playing the loving son one last time for the only audience that had ever mattered to him. "Don't touch me," I said quietly, and he stopped. I lifted my hand, and Nell rose from the side of the room where she had been sitting unnoticed, and she walked to the podium and set down a slim recorder. "This is the sworn testimony of Salvatore Romano," I said, "recorded 11 days ago, before he died. He was a welder on the Lincoln job. He saw what happened the night before my brother was killed." I pressed play. Sal's voice filled the atrium, thin and broken and unmistakably honest. The voice of a dying man with nothing left to gain. The whole room listened to him describe the 2 figures arguing on the scaffolding under the work lights, the uncle pointing at the building, the nephew spreading his hands, and then the young man, alone on the platform after Ray had climbed down, kneeling at the east cross brace with a wrench in his hand. I watched the reporters' faces. I watched the board. I watched the woman from the district attorney's office lean forward and begin, very deliberately, to write. When it ended, I set Ray's papers on the podium beside the recorder, the brittle yellow pages in my brother's own hand. "My brother documented all of it before he died," I said. "The failed inspection, the lab certificates proving the steel was substituted, a signed statement naming the man who did it. He hid the originals with Sal Romano, who kept them in his basement for 28 years and mailed them to me the day before he passed." I looked at the board. These are not the ramblings of a confused old man. This is the licensed inspector of record, proving his own murder and the danger to that school in his own hand, before either one happened. "And this," Nell said, stepping forward, "is the report of Tom Okafor, an independent structural engineer with no connection to this company. He assessed Lincoln Elementary using the original engineering and the documented substitution. His conclusion is that the building is operating at roughly 60% of its designed load capacity and should never have been occupied. There are 600 children inside it right now. That landed in the room harder than the murder had. I saw it move through the board, through the reporters, through everyone. The murder was a tragedy from the past. The children were a danger happening today. The city inspector stood up from the 3rd row. "I've reviewed this material over the past 3 days," she said, her plain voice carrying. "As of this morning, I've filed an emergency order. Lincoln Elementary is being evacuated and closed pending a full structural inspection. The district was notified an hour ago. Those children are already being walked out of that building." I closed my eyes for just a moment. Those children were already being walked out. Right now. While I stood here, 28 years too late for Ray, and just barely, by the grace of God and a dying man's courage, in time for them, Daniel made one last move. He turned to the board, to the only people whose loyalty he thought he could still buy. "Think about what you're doing," he said. And now the smoothness was cracking, the panic showing through. "If this goes public, the company is finished. The stock, the contracts, all of it, gone. Hundreds of jobs. Your jobs. I can manage this. We keep it internal. We settle quietly. Nobody has to know. I finished for him. That's the whole business, isn't it, son? Nobody has to know. That's what you said about the steel. That's what you said to Sal. Nobody has to know. And the money keeps flowing. And the buildings keep standing on luck. And the children keep walking under them. I shook my head slowly. I don't care about the stock. I don't care about the company. I would burn every dollar of it to the ground to give my brother back his name and those children a safe roof. You never understood that about me. You never understood Ray at all. The woman from the district attorney's office stood and crossed the floor, and 2 uniformed officers came in through the atrium doors, where they had been waiting. Daniel Mercer, she said. You're under arrest for the murder of Raymond Mercer. There will be additional charges of fraud and endangerment. You have the right to remain silent. He did not run. There was nowhere to run. As they put the handcuffs on him, in front of the board and the cameras and the empire he had killed for, he looked at me with an expression I had never once seen on his face in 52 years. Not anger, not even fear. Bewilderment. As if he genuinely could not understand how the tired old fool he had been managing had brought down everything he built. Then Margaret stood up. She walked to the podium on her own, past her son in handcuffs, and she faced the district attorney and the cameras, and in a voice that shook but did not stop, she said, My name is Margaret Mercer. I knew. The night before Ray died, he came to me. I knew what my son had done, and I said nothing for 28 years. I'm ready to tell the truth now. All of it. Whatever it costs me. I looked at my wife standing there, finally upright, finally brave, and whatever was left to come for her and for me. I knew that in that one moment she had done the thing Ray died doing. She had chosen the truth over her own protection, outside, across the city. 600 children were walking out of a school into the afternoon sun. Safe. Never knowing how close it had been. Never knowing the name of the man who had died trying to save them. But I knew. And at long last. So would everyone else. The months that followed moved both fast and slow, the way time does after a storm has finally broken. Fast, because there was so much to be done. Slow, because every day I woke into a world that had been rearranged overnight, and I had to learn to stand in it. The trial did not take long. With Sal's recorded testimony, with Ray's own documentation in his own hand, with the financial trail Nell had laid out across 28 years and half a dozen buildings. There was no defense left for Daniel to hide behind. His lawyers, the expensive ones who had once eaten cases like mine for breakfast, advised him to take what mercy the court would offer. He did not. He fought it to the end, the way he had fought everything, certain to the last that he was smarter than the people in the room. He was not. I sat in that courtroom every single day. I owed Ray that much, to be present this time, the way I had not been on the morning he died. I listened to them read out the charges and the evidence, and at last, the verdict. Guilty of murder in the 2nd degree. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of reckless endangerment. 600 counts of it. 1 for every child who had walked under that roof. The judge handed down a sentence that meant my son would not be a free man again in this life. When they let him out, he looked back at me one last time. I held his gaze. I did not look away, and I did not soften. He was my son, and I had loved him from the moment he was born, and I would carry the grief of what he had become until the day I died. But I did not owe him my forgiveness, and I did not give it. Some debts are too large. He had murdered the best man I ever knew, and let me drown in guilt for half my life, and he had been willing to let a school full of children die rather than admit it. A father can love a son and still know exactly what that son is. Margaret faced her own reckoning. She had broken no law by being there the night Ray came to warn her. But the years of silence, the obstruction, the mortgage, paid with stolen money, those were not nothing. In the end, because she came forward of her own will, because her testimony helped convict her son, and because the court saw a frightened woman more than a criminal one, she was given probation and a suspended sentence. No prison, but no peace either. She left the house on Maple Ridge. We both understood that we could not go on as we had, that 39 years had been built on a silence too deep to simply live inside again. She moved to a small apartment near her sister. We are not enemies. We are something sadder and gentler than that. Two old people who loved each other, and a family that turned out to be rotten at the root, grieving it together from a careful distance. I visit. We talk about the boys when they were small, before everything. Sometimes that is all that two people have left, and it has to be enough. Lincoln Elementary was closed for the rest of that year. The city's engineers pulled their core samples and confirmed everything Ray had written and Okafor had warned. The columns were exactly as bad as my brother had said. There were a few voices, the kind there always are, who complained about the cost and the disruption, who said the building had stood for 28 years, so why tear it apart now? I went to a public meeting, and I stood up, an old builder among them, and I told them that a thing standing is not the same as a thing safe, and that my brother had died knowing the difference. They tore out the cheap steel. They rebuilt the bones of that school the way they should have been built the first time, with the good steel, the steel the children had been promised. I paid for the difference myself. It was the truest money I ever spent. And then, on a clear, cold morning in late autumn, I went to see Ray. The cemetery was quiet. The bronze statue stood where it had always stood. My brother's face staring out at nothing. The hands the sculptor had gotten right. I had not been able to look at it properly in 28 years. Every anniversary, I had come and stood and drowned in my own guilt. The guilt of the man who was not there, who signed a contract across town while his brother fell. But I knew now that Ray had not fallen. And I knew that he had not died, alone with his secret, helpless and forgotten. He had documented everything. He had hidden it where I would find it. He had been counting on me, across all those years, to finish what he started. And I had. Late, far too late, but I had. I knelt down in front of the statue, my old knees protesting against the cold ground, and I put my hand flat against the bronze, against my brother's hands that were the same as mine. I got them. Ray, I said. The words came out rough. I got him, and the kids are safe, every one of them. You were right about everything, and the whole city knows your name now, knows what you did, knows what you died for. My eyes burned and I let them. I'm sorry it took me so long. I'm so sorry, brother, but it's done. You can rest now. We both can. For the first time in 28 years, kneeling in the cold beside the man who shared my face, I felt the weight lift off my chest. Not all of it. Some weights you carry to the grave, but the worst of it. The guilt, the not knowing, the unfinished thing. It lifted, and the autumn air came into my lungs clean and cold and full. I stayed there a long while, an old man and his brother, until the sun was low. Then I got up, and I went to do the last thing Ray would have wanted. 6 months after they tore down the east wing of Lincoln Elementary, I stood on the new foundation with a welding torch in my hand. My hands are not as steady as they were 40 years ago. The knuckles swell when the weather turns. But when I dropped my mask down and struck the arc, the old fire came back the way it always does. White hot. Honest. The one thing in my life that never lied to me. The new beams were stamped with the right numbers this time. 60,000 pounds per square inch. Real steel. The kind Ray died trying to put in the ground. I laid the first weld myself. Slow and clean. And when I lifted my mask, the foreman of the crew was watching me with his arms crossed. He was maybe 30. He did not know my brother. He did not know what that wing cost. "That's a good beat, old-timer," he said. I told him my brother taught me. I did not tell him the rest. They unveiled the sign on a cold Tuesday morning. The Ray Mercer Safety Foundation. I had fought the lawyers about the name. They wanted my name on it. Mercer Steel survived. Barely. And there were people who thought putting my face on a charity would help the brand. I told them the brand could rot. The name on that building would be Ray's, or there would be no building. The foundation does one thing, and it does it without mercy. It re-inspects old public construction. Schools first, then hospitals, then the places where people who cannot fight for themselves spend their days. We pull the original drawings. We test the steel. We do not take a signature on faith. Not ever again. In the first 6 months, we flagged 4 buildings. One of them was a daycare. I think about that daycare more than I should. Here is what I learned. And I am an old man. So you will forgive me for saying it plainly. The men who hurt you are rarely strangers. They sit at your table. They carry your name. They learn how to grieve in public because they watched you do it. The hardest betrayal in this life is not from your enemies. It is from the people you built everything for, the ones you would have died protecting, who decided your love was a tool they could use. I gave Daniel everything, the company, my trust, 28 years of the benefit of the doubt. And he stood over my brother's body and signed a piece of paper. But here is the other thing I learned. And this one matters more. It is never too late to do the right thing. Sal Romano was a dying man who carried a secret for 28 years. He could have taken it to the grave. Instead, he found me at a graveside with a brass watch and 3 words. Let an old man die brave. That choice saved 600 children. One act of courage at the very end of a long life of silence. Margaret made her choice too late to undo the harm, but not too late to tell the truth. The truth still mattered, and me. I was 70 years old, and I had stopped fighting. I had decided grief was the only thing left for a man like me. I was wrong. A man is never too old to stand up. The fire is still in your hands. You just have to drop the mask and strike the arc, if you are listening to this, and you have carried something heavy for too long. Hear me. The clock you think stopped is still running. There is still time to be the man your family needed. There is still time to tell the truth. There is still time to fight for the people who cannot fight for themselves. Do not let them tell you that you are too old, too tired, too forgetful, too far gone. That is the lie they need you to believe so they can take what is yours. Stand up, one more time. I went back to Ray's grave on the anniversary. The same bronze statue, the same Pittsburgh rain. This time, I did not come to mourn. I came to report. I told him the school was safe. I told him the steel was real. I told him his name was on a building that would protect children long after both of us were dust. Then I put my hand on the cold bronze of his shoulder, the way I used to put it on the warm shoulder of my brother. And I told him the only thing left to say. I told him I finished the job. The rain kept falling. The watch in my pocket kept ticking. And for the first time in 28 years, it sounded like peace. If this story moved you, if you have a brother, a father, a child you have lost, or a truth you have buried, do this one thing for me. Tell someone you love them while the clock is still running. And if you believe a man is never too old to fight for what is right, type "still ticking" in the comments below. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today. This is Walter Mercer. Thank you for standing with me.